Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Press Gazette's second webinar in our Future of Media Technology series. This one's all about website personalisation. It has the subtitle, How Much Data is Too Much? We'd like to give publishers some insight into how we can use reader data in a non-creepy way to improve the experience of readers and hopefully encourage them to spend some money with us or on subscriptions perhaps, or one of our commercial partners. Apparently, according to our website, today's event is CPD certified, which sounds very official. Joining me today are Gordon Edel, sorry, Gordon, you pronounce your name better than me, I'm sure, from Toronto, who is co-founder and chief revenue officer of Sophie.io, a technology which has helped Canada's Globe and Mail reach more than 170,000 digital subscribers. We also have Edward Roussel joining us live from a news building in London, who is head of digital at the Times and Sunday Times, which together with the Times Literary Supplement have around 400,000 digital subscribers. And finally, we have Jenna Rack, who's Director of Audience Development, Social Media and Analytics at Vogue Europe, joining us live from Vogue House in Oxford Circus. And least glamorously of all, I'm in my shed, Plumpton Green, because the office is too noisy to do a webcast from now. So look, thanks everyone for joining up your time, giving up your time to share some insight with us this afternoon. We're going to be with you for about the next 3/4 of an hour. So if anyone would like to ask a question of the panel, please take the opportunity to do so and type it into the webinar viewer, and I'll see it, and I'll get to as many questions as I can at the end. So as with everything that Press Gazette does nowadays, we want to give publishers and people who make decisions in the media the information they need to ensure that quality content can thrive in the digital age. So it's a bit commercial. I mean, the best guarantee we think of editorial brilliance is being able to sort of turn a buck and make some money out of it. So I'm going to start off by just asking each of our guests to say a quick hello and just correct me on the pronunciations of their name. Sorry about that. Hello. Hi, Edward. Welcome. Say hello. Tell us a bit about yourselves, I should say. Thank you.
Okay. So as you're curious about the pronunciation of my name, my surname is French. It's Roussel if you're in France, or Roussel if you're in England. And I've been back in the UK for a year now as head of digital for the Times and Sunday Times. And I previously spent 8 years working for the Wall Street Journal in New York, where I was head of all products, and then I became chief innovation officer and head of global partnerships. So that's my recent story.
Yes, and I think I first encountered you in your Telegraph days, back when the head of digital at Telegraph, correct?
Indeed, that's right. That was prior to me going to New York.
Yeah, so great. Well, look, great to have you. Thanks very much for joining. Jenna, hello. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hello, I'm Jenna, Canadian, so kind of a nice little middle ground between the other two speakers. Canadian, but work for Condé Nast in the UK. I was at Facebook and HuffPost before, and then moved here in 2015, and I've been in several different roles at Condé Nast since then, all rooted in data. I'm currently leading the audience development, social, and analytics teams for Vogue, for our European Vogues, so UK, France, Italy, Spain, and Germany, as well as keeping oversight of the UK portfolio, which I did before as well. So how do we grow our audiences? How do we make sure that we are talking to the right people, writing the right content, putting it in the right place at the right time? And I'm also still the co-chair of the Aud Dev committee for the AOP, which I've done for a few years. So work with all of my audience development colleagues at all the other British publishing houses. So editorial is a little bit more of my focus. And to do with this presentation or this conversation, it's how data can be used to improve like the reader experience with right content, right time, like I mentioned before.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks for joining. And finally, Gordon, you're in Toronto, is that correct?
Yeah, in Toronto, and it's Edel, which is Norwegian, but they changed the spelling a long time ago, so it no longer makes sense to anyone. For my part, I'm Gordon Edel. I'm one of the co-founders of Sophie.io, which is a platform for prediction, for optimization and for personalization and curating content automatically, that was created at the Globe and Mail to support our subscription products, which we've now started to provide to other publishers around the world. So I spend a lot of time talking about how to use personal data well, and some of the decisions that we made along the way, which we'll get into during this call. By way of some background for some context, before that, while heading up our innovation lab, I also was our corporate information security officer and the co-chair of the Privacy Oversight Committee for more than 5 years. So Canada, we're not European, but Canadian privacy regulations are very strict. And there's a lot there that we have to take very seriously with a 180-year-old news brand to take care of. So really looking forward to the conversation today, and it's great to be here.
Great. Well, yeah, I'll be asking you to put that privacy hat on, I think, because there's quite a lot of it's a big area, isn't it? And it's only kind of getting bigger over the next year or so. Great. Okay. Well, let's dive in. So, personalization is something that has been talked about, I think, for as long as I've been sort of writing about news websites, and it seems to be something that gets more sophisticated all the time. If we're talking about personalized web offerings, I think we divide up into 3 categories of things: sort of editorial, advertising, and then sort of marketing messaging. So of the website itself, or subscriptions. So when it comes to sort of website homepages, I don't see an awful lot of personalization around, but I might be wrong. Maybe it's sneaky and I'm missing it. I know the FT lets me choose which topics I'm interested in. Mail Online kind of lets me choose between a news or showbiz view, but beyond that, I'm not aware of it. But I'd be interested to know if there's more around than I realise. And I remember a few years ago, just as an aside, that the digital printing, there were a European newspaper that was trying to do a sort of personalised newspaper, which it delivered to people every morning. I don't think that took off, but it's quite a nice idea. So, Edward, are you doing much personalisation editorial at the Times titles? And if not, sort of, why not?
Well, I think the way that you segmented it, Dominic, is the right one. You know, there's sales-driven personalization with software like Pernative that helps you target individuals or cohorts of individuals. There's marketing personalization with kind of software that Gordon creates, which allows you to segment potential subscriber bases and treat them differently depending on how frequently they come to your website. And then there's editorial personalization, and I think. In the third category, I agree with you. I rather like what the FT does in terms of, it's probably more customized than personalized. In other words, you elect to follow a topic, and then that topic can be surfaced to you in different ways, be it a push notification or an email, like my FT emails, morning emails. But that's a little bit different from personalization, which tends to be sort of algorithmically driven. So we're very much tilting towards the former, not the latter. So the ability, if you're a Liverpool fan like myself, the ability to follow stories on that topic or to follow stories by the author and have that content pushed to you is the direction that we're heading in. The bit that we're more skeptical about is the idea that an algorithm can replace editorial hierarchy. We think that a key part of our value proposition is not just the underlying journalism, major scoops of the kind that we published this morning, but also the editorial hierarchy of those stories. And that's something that's essentially crafted by a human and not an algorithm. So that's probably where we delineate or highlight the shortcomings, if you like, of algorithmic personalization.
Okay. And I guess that customization versus personalization is quite an important point, I guess, because you're customizing it. You're putting the reader in the driving seat, aren't you? Letting them kind of pick the things that they're most interested in and making sure they don't miss it, as opposed to sort of saying we're going to cleverly decide some personalized thing which we think you would like, sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, news is inherently unpredictable, and historic patterns of consumption are not good predictive patterns of future consumption. You can get extremely bored by a particular topic. Partygate's a good example. Unfortunately, Ukraine is also another example where, and you've written about this, Dominic, and Press Gazette's written about this, which is, topics over time, that aren't necessarily enduring. So it's inherently extremely difficult to be predictive about what people are going to wish to read about when it comes to news-driven publications.
Great, interesting. Okay, thanks for that. Jenna, what's your how do you play it at Vogue? How do you sort of personalize the picture?
Completely agree with Edward that I love that even wording, customization over personalization. We're very early on in our journey towards customization, personalization. I fully agree. My New York Times app, the New York Times has done a lot of really great things and interesting things, and they've gone very personalized, and they've come back to actually their For You page. I don't look at it very often. I mostly go to homepage and read curation, because there's just still such a desire for curation. We are exploring the wonderful thing about the company is that we've got global brands. So with my Vogue hat on, Vogue.com has rolled out a logged in state earlier this year, testing, because obviously, as we know, first party data is king or queen. And we're trying to get more of that and try and understand more about our readers and more about content consumption patterns. So we've created it, but I also am a big believer that it needs to be additive. Like, I don't want to log into something for the sake of logging into it. Like, there needs to be something I'm going to get out of it. Recipes is something that I know a lot of different publishing houses have found as like the key thing to have. If you've got a place to be able to save your recipes, that's their way in. We only have House and Garden, so that's only going to be an opportunity for maybe one of our 7 brands here in the UK. So we've been talking more holistically about what quality content is, what would make someone want to actually log in, and what is the additional benefit they're going to get from it. So we've actually got a new KPI this year globally, which is logged in users. The two ones, logged in users and engaged minutes, and those two are ones that we've decided this year as ones that we are going to define as what we're aiming to grow. Obviously, quality metrics have changed vastly over the years. I think only a few years ago, a quality metric that we were using was Facebook shares. And actually today, I would never say that Facebook shares is a good example of what good quality is. So we're still learning. We're still in the process of figuring out what that looks like and how we create a really good experience. So we do actually, when we create logged in state, if we ever do get to a point where we create a registration gate of some form, and then potentially in the future, no plans, but an actual paywall, it's a journey. And to get there, you have to know a lot about your readers and what they're going to want to read and how to give them what they want, whether it's in customization format or personalization format.
Okay, thanks, Gemma. And just finally to you, Gordon.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we have a lot of history of doing kind of one-to-one personalization of editorial content at the Globe and Mail. So for more than 10 years, we've been building recommendation engines. But interestingly, kind of the story that we're really trying to help the industry understand now isn't so much about personalization. One of the things that we found is very similar to what Edward is saying about kind of that editorial hierarchy and the importance of kind of like maintaining your brand and having that be a strong driver of your identity. Typically, the personalization widgets that we've built, that we've run at the Globe and Mail, they've existed in isolation, in a small box that says, in case you missed it, in a small box that says, just for you. And the interesting thing about that is that those widgets, as effective as they were at appealing to an individual, they didn't ever occupy very much of the screen real estate. And so it was sort of like a problem of you had a lever that was very effective, but your lever was sort of 5% long. You only had 5% of the pixels to drive the business. What we do for commercial clients of Sophie is something very different than customization, different than personalization. It's something we call global optimization, which is really designed to sort of take an approach that uses wisdom of the crowds to really make decisions that feel like the decisions a newsroom makes, so that we can actually emulate the same sort of decisions, the same sort of news hierarchy that the newsroom would do if they put their mind to it, if they were really focused on it. But we do it at sort of a massive scale that it's hard to ask people to do. So at the Globe and Mail, very famously, more than 99% of all of the content placements across all of the promotion slots are done algorithmically. The newsroom still controls the top of the page. They still do set that editorial agenda, But the rest of the time, we really do rely on AI to reflect the editorial agenda of what the newsroom is producing and to promote it really effectively in a way that maps to what the newsroom would do. And we do that across section pages, across article pages. And what we found is instead of having sort of a lever that was 5% long, now we have a lever that's 99% long. And in more than 3 years of running a fully automated website, we've never had a reader complain. We have very prickly, very serious editors. You know, we are a very serious news publication. Our editors don't complain about the decisions Sophie makes either on social media, even after they've departed, because generally it actually does a great job of reflecting what it is the newsroom cares about and showcasing our best work. And we're really proud of it for that reason. And now you can see Sophie clients like Atlanta Journal-Constitution seeing the same thing, which is it still feels like the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. It's still showcasing their best content, but it performs a bit better than the editors, because we can actually look at kind of tens of millions of interactions, hundreds of millions of page promotion opportunities, and we can sort of see where the content is really resonating with that audience. And it lets you do things that are different than people can do. And
does everyone see the same thing, or you don't give a different experience to different cohorts?
There's sort of two different ways you can use it. So in one case, we do global optimization. So at the Globe and Mail, everyone sees the same version of our homepage across the entire country. It's there to reinforce the editorial agenda and to make sure that editorial voice is consistent for the country. Interestingly, though, on some pages, we know that there are regional differences. So we use the same underlying logic to create geo-segmented versions of pages. So Western Canada sees a different version of our politics page than Ontario, than Quebec. They're subtly different. They are taking advantage of the knowledge of the entire crowd, but we sort of compare what do people in Western Canada care about compared to Central or Eastern Canada. And we create some subtle differences in the experience that, again, they're not radically different, but they do indicate kind of that those audiences aren't quite the same. Generally, though, we are more in favor of this global optimization, really using the wisdom of the crowd to set an agenda for the day that editorial can keep an eye on.
Okay. I think we'd be having a much different conversation today if social media wasn't a part of this, because I think a lot of people have used social media as the personalization element, where the algorithms of Facebook and Instagram and Twitter like surfaced content based on the other things that they were. So if someone followed GQ, they're going to see the GQ content that was probably most relevant to them based on keywords and things like that. The black box that is the algorithm. So I think we as publishers have have an even stronger responsibility of curation and hierarchy, as Gordon and Edward both referred to, because they were getting the personalization element there, so they can get the curation and the editorial agenda setting. This is what this group of people think is very important for you to know today from this website, versus you can go on Facebook and see a bunch of content from the same publications, but served to you in a different format. So I think the last 10 years has very much impacted our industry. And I think it should be very different.
Okay. Look, so thanks for that. So different, like, contrasting philosophies really on that then on the panel, which is interesting. Let's go to advertising.
It's a good conversation.
Yeah. Exactly. Let's go on to advertising, which I guess is the area where personalization's most advanced. I mean, there's a huge amount of computing power expended every second, isn't there, ensuring that readers see the most relevant ads. In my case, it seems to be that I'm always seeing pictures of sheds on adverts, which is probably quite a good shout, to be honest. I was in the market for another shed. But it's an area that opens up a hornet's nest of issues around sort of data collection and the data, how we gather data and what we do with it. I go to you first for this one, Jen. I mean, what sort of audience data are you gathering at Vogue, and how are you using it in a sort of commercial way? I know you're more on the editorial side, but as much as you can speak to this.
I mean, I bridge the gap between editorial and commercial in that sense. So I won't. There's much smarter people that can speak much more at length about the really interesting, like permutive, for example, and integrations, and how we actually look at who our readers are and making sure that they're getting the right advertisements. But there's so many other ways you can use audience data that can help our advertising partners as well. I mentioned first-party data being really important. One of the things we launched, I think it was last year, maybe 2 years ago now, was Vogue Insiders, which has something like 80,000 plus members, which they basically fill out a really extensive beauty profile, which we then use to create bespoke content and sampling opportunities for our advertisers. So they get really detailed information about skin and hair and whatever, and then they get really great beauty content back related to someone with curly hair. Like, I care about curly hair, so I want to get content about curly hair, and I want to be advertised products that are going to be relevant to me rather than not. There's also just really good dialogue between editorial and commercial about content performance. So when something's doing really well, or a series of things or something's doing well, like colored eyeliner right now is incredibly popular, and feeding that back in. So when we're talking to our advertising partners, being able to give that information, because we've just got so much data by nature of content consumption patterns, that we can also feed back into that commercial side of things and help them understand what resonates with readers, and how to connect in the right way.
Okay,
I think with ad technology, so typically the algorithms are looking for two things. One is they're looking for information about the audience, so that advertisers can target specific cohorts, and that's sort of what Permative does. And the other they're looking for, and the phrase I think that's used is brand safety, which basically is jargon for having ads that that aren't aligned with certain types of stories. And that's a little bit more challenging for publishers, because if you take a story like Ukraine, typically advertisers don't want their ads in a Ukraine story because of the nature of the content. And so I think that what you can see is a little bit of a conflict there with that type of software, between where newsrooms want to take the story and the types of content that advertisers wish to be associated with.
And so at the Times, you've got logged in readers, haven't you, for the most part?
Yeah.
And so that means you know exactly who they are and what they're reading. But how do you or do you use that information to kind of give them a better advertising experience on the one hand, or share information with advertisers on the other hand?
I think advertising software is so sophisticated now that they are really tracking you across multiple devices and sites, and so yes, they'll have a view in terms of advertising software have a view about what they're reading on the Times site, but they've really got a kind of a pretty full picture about all of us across multiple sites. So that's a slightly different thing. I mean, I think the logged-in data is really useful. Is really most useful for marketing purposes. So being able to segment audiences based on, for example, the level of engagement, and this is something we look at very closely. If you're a very highly engaged reader, more than half of our digital subscribers read our products every day, so that's great. But we might offer you a different marketing proposition than if you're a very low engaged reader, where we'll probably be trying to encourage you to do something like sign up to a relevant newsletter or download our app, which are both actions that we can correlate with higher levels of retention. So I think for us, that data is fundamentally about marketing rather than about ad sales.
Yeah, so I mean, you'd be interested to, I guess that's potentially the biggest opportunity, isn't it, with personalisation? It's giving people that sort of personalised message. I've sort of click on the Guardian website, quite a lot, and I always get the same message, which is, Dom, you've read 117 articles in the last week, but you've still not taken out a subscription, and I'm like, well, you've got £1 billion in the bank, and there's loads of other websites that I subscribe to, so it's quite nice to have a free one. But I just wonder, it'd be interesting to hear a bit more about that, Edward, about how you sort of tailor that message to sort of, I guess, to promote subscriptions and other messages.
Well, it's really about trying to tailor a message that's relevant to the reader. So, for example, if you're selling reader, if you're serving, and we define that as somebody who's been a subscriber for more than 2 years, then we might, for example, be inviting you to an event, the Times Plus event, And that's really about rewarding your loyalty and giving you another reason to continue to renew your subscription. And if you're a low engaged reader, it's really about trying to look more carefully at your levels of interest and see whether there's a newsletter that's of your interests, which again helps create that sort of daily habit. So it's really about segmenting audiences, in our case, largely based on the extent of their level of engagement and their interests, and then trying to find what you might consider to be offers that are relevant to them that will help us with retention.
And how do you kind of serve those to them? Is it via like messaging on the site, or is it mainly via email? What do you find the sort of, or is it another way?
I mean, it's a little bit of both. And again, the advantage of having a subscription model is that you do have email addresses which are very powerful. Low tech is sometimes extremely powerful, and the email addresses are very powerful. But obviously, we have to be careful. There's a balance, and you don't want to spam people, and hence the kind of making the offer that's highly targeted to a particular individual is important.
And then I guess you also have the kind of drive-bys who are people who land on the site via search, and you want to
and that's kind of really more kind of Gordon's that's Gordon's core business, right? Which is how you segment between drive-bys and treat them differently, and maybe let them pass the paywall versus people who are maybe frequenting your site on a very regular basis but not subscribing, and being able to segment those audiences and treat them differently.
Go on then, Gordon. I'll let you. This is very much your wheelhouse, isn't it? So yeah. So to tell us how you approach this sort of, what the information that you glean and the extent to which you give me a different message and experience from, say, Edward or Jenna when we land on the Global Mail.
Yeah, our approach is actually quite different when it comes to the way we use personalization, and particularly personalization for acquisition. There's some pretty special use cases and the things that you need to be able to take privacy into account, and then you need to also be able to build a sustainable foundation for a business. The sort of technologies that we're bringing to market around paywalls are really next generation paywall technologies. So for Sophie clients using our dynamic paywall technology, there is no concept of a meter count. Literally, the idea of a meter count does not exist. So that 117 stories that you've read, we don't think it's useful to tell the audience that, and it's not actually useful to us in terms of making a decision about whether to ask you to subscribe or even to ask you to register. In the same way, we actually, Sophie clients, there is no concept of a meter calendar. There's no concept of you read this many stories this month. There's also no concept of a meter reset. We do a very different thing, which is sort of like each time a member of your audience reaches for a story, we're sort of playing this very sophisticated sort of, it's much more like a video game than anything else, which is we're trying to figure out, is the best win the publisher can hope to achieve here, is it just to generate advertising revenue? Is it to get an email address, to have that very critical, crucial point of contact where I can nurture a relationship? Or is there any chance where even if you're a flyby member of the audience, even if I've never seen you before, is there something about the content? Is there something about the time of day or the referral slot that you came from, whether it was search or social or after browsing the site for a little while and not picking a piece of content? Is there something about this moment that means even though I don't know you, you will give me a credit card immediately? And that approach to kind of like looking for opportunities and learning, again, we prefer to kind of learn from the wisdom of the crowds, lets us do some things that are a little different than what the traditional sort of user journey would be, and the very sort of very linear path that a lot of people conceive as the way to acquire subscribers. So it's a pretty different approach. It also means that when people are really aggressive about clearing cookies, we can learn from all of the people who clear cookies in order to still have an effect when we don't know you, when you still appear unknown. We're learning across all of those audiences in different ways. So it's pretty fundamentally different. And I think you're going to see a lot more technologies like this come into being in order to really address and respond to some really their critical concerns in the community. And I don't think you can look past that, but you also need to find a way to respectfully build a sustainable business.
And so, and what are the tactics you use then? Do you have like a sort of like a menu of say 20 possible actions which you could take depending on who the person is, and then
it's really interesting, right? So one of the issues with Sophie is we're not an end-to-end shop. We're not a paywall company. We are just the black box to help you make a decision. And so with publishers, your current offer management, your current marketing program, your current kind of tiers of subscription, those are things that you still manage. They're still things that you operate in, that you run. What we do is we abstract them into sort of this idea of your business where we're looking for value tiers. And the black box is really designed to figure out in any moment with this customer, what is the right value tier that I can get them in? Where do I have a chance of winning? So we don't bother people for their email address if they're not going to register. We're going to keep them in that kind of advertising tier, and the system is smart enough to know that's the best thing that you can do. So more time, more engagement, more page views, low friction. That's the best chance you have with this audience right now. Whereas with other audience members, we're actually just going to send a message that says sort of, you're going to say, hey, Sophie, I have this user trying to read this article. What should I do? And we're just going to give you a category of response, which says, do option 1, where you actually manage option 1 and you control all of that. So from a marketing perspective, from a paywall execution perspective, that all just kind of taps into the existing systems you use to do that. So we don't dictate. We just try to understand the business and then enable yield optimization on top of the strategies you already have in flight.
Okay. Thanks for that. Well, it's fascinating. We could talk about it for hours, but I'm sure you could, Gordon. But it's good. It's very, very interesting. So I've got like a content recommendation down here as a note, and I think with that, what I'm asking is what's a good tactic, or what good tactics have you found that works in terms of basically just getting the reader to read one article and then read another one, not go away and hopefully read several. That sort of finding a way to suggest a sort of good next step for them, depending on who they are. I'll maybe go to you first with that, Jenna, in terms of how you kind of keep.
We've got a team. We've literally got a recirculation team that is incredibly smart, and we talk about this all the time, and we play with all these different metrics, and there isn't a perfect answer, and it depends on brand, depends on market. We've tried so many different things in terms of like newness. Is it the most recently published thing? Is it the most popular in the last 24 hours, 72 hours? Really interesting hearing Gordon say all these things. It's like, oh wow, that we literally have a team doing the things that your technology is doing. But we still see a lot of power in self-selected. So sometimes editors still put in the copy, like this, then you'll love this, or these are 3 articles that are related that actually add to the story and give more depth. And we still see a lot of click-throughs, and we still see a lot of circulation through those. It's a lot less agile. So obviously the more that we can do things like build in widgets where we can replace things out. And so if an editor chooses to embed a story, we can quickly change that story out for something else if we need it in the future. But we're always changing and trying to create things and products that allow editorial teams who know their content and know their readers the best to make the best decisions for the situation. So recirculation is really important in our world. I can't remember the number, but some huge percentage of people don't come in on homepage. They come in on a story. They come in on a story from search or social or some sort of other referral. They come in, often click the logo to get to homepage, and then we'll look through the curation of what's there. But quite often we'll click through other articles as well. So that looking at click tracking and seeing what people are actually consuming next, there's not as clear of patterns as you might think. But we're trying to make the right decisions editorially and from a product standpoint to try and maximize the number of articles people are consuming. And like I mentioned earlier, engaged minutes we're now counting as like one of those metrics that we're looking at. So are they reading 10 articles? Are they reading a really like a 10,000 word long read, tell all by Wired or whatever, that we get more advertising? Going back just quickly to what you were saying before, is that like our customer lifetime model, like customer lifetime value model, has changed so much in the last even just 7 years since I started here. because all of a sudden now we have all these different options, right? So will we get benefit from the funnel of getting them to sign up to a newsletter or even just follow us on some social media accounts so that we actually can contact them again? But then even from a revenue standpoint, it's like display advertising. We've got like our print subscriptions. We've now got things like Vogue Club that I mentioned, Vogue Club, Vogue Insiders. We've got Vogue Collections, which is like jumpers that we're selling. And so all of a sudden, the next click could be one of 10 different things that we will benefit from in some way, shape, or form. And how do we balance good user experience with also revenue driving, important for the bottom line?
But it sounds like from what you're saying, you kind of empower editors and journalists to get involved in that and
very much so, yeah.
Make a sort of intuitive decision and come up with something quite natural.
It's a balance, yeah, because like what Gordon said is that a lot of the time it is editorial that knows, and we don't want it to be formulaic. So it is very much about empowering editorial and using data to be data informed, not data driven. Using data in a way that combines editorial knowledge with what we know works.
Okay. It's Edward, the same thing to you. I mean, the Times and Sunday Times strike me as being very, very different from other newspaper websites in the sense that they're a little bit more for me like a newspaper in that I kind of browse the whole thing rather than coming in and snacking on stories. But I'd really be really interested to hear how many articles your readers would tend to read and how you sort of encourage them to kind of stick around and kind of and read more than one thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we correlate anti-churn measures, if we correlate retention with user behavior, what we find is the tightest correlation is repeat visits. So if you return daily, the probability of your churn is exceptionally low, and more than half of our digital subscribers return daily. So that's a group of people where the churn rates are exceptionally low. If you look at dwell time on our iPhone, it's averaging about 17 minutes per visit, which is quite high. And on our iPad app, it's 27 minutes per visit. So a lot of our activity is focused on persuading people to do one of two things, either to sign up to a newsletter that's very relevant to their interests, or to download the app. And once you download the app and you're on people's phone, then the probability of being able to retain them and the probability of them returning on a regular basis is significantly enhanced. We also do a lot of what Jen is talking about, which is have a recirculation team that runs a never-ending series of tests. And what we find is very similar to what Jen has found, which is that whatever the signal that you point them, whether it's other stories related to a particular topic, or whether it's stories that are related to that specific story, or whether it's stories that readers are reading. What tends to win every time is related stories. So stories that are tightly correlated, tightly related to a particular, the particular story that you're reading at that point. So notwithstanding a lot of different tests, that seems to be what always bubbles up to the top of the surface. So that's what we try to focus on doing well. And we use algorithms to surface to editors the types of stories that we think are highly relevant to the story that you're reading. And editors will curate those stories and serve them in. And that's sort of where we're at now. I think the next level for us is really around that, improving that curation experience. And back to that user case, which is, you love William Hague and stories that William Hague writes, and you want to be able to have all William Hague stories sent to you in some shape or form, or you love Liverpool Football Club and you want all Liverpool stories sent to you. So I think the next frontier for us in terms of engagement is probably that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's very, very useful, isn't it? And interesting. Yeah, the idea that really sometimes the bigger win might not be to serve them another story that day, but to get them on the newsletter or the app, and then you're going to have them hopefully every day. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that we have a data science team, and that's what they tell us correlates best with subscription retention. It's actually the frequency of the visit rather than the volume of content they read on a particular visit. So I think that to us is the key thing, is try to make reading the Times part of your daily habit.
And just So, asking for a friend here, because I'm very interested, actually, really personally, around the newsletters side of it. I mean, the fulfillment of newsletters, email newsletters, is really hard, isn't it? Because you're at the behest of a whole bunch of different email systems, like from Yahoo to like Outlook to whatever, like company security settings are in place. I mean, do you have any kind of issues around that, or any tips in terms of like just being able to get those emails out there and keep people?
Well, I think you just have to work. I mean, as with so much in digital, you have to select a specialist supplier. We work with a company called Sell Through. I'm sure there are others. Yeah, that's right. We're pretty happy with them, and so you're right, Dominic. That there's complexity in really kind of every corner of digital, and hence the importance of specialist suppliers in that space, and that's how we get around the multiplicity of different systems that people use.
Well, I guess that's like a whole other thing, isn't it? But it's like knowing what stuff to try and build yourself and what stuff to
We've also done quite a bit of work in terms of like re-engagement, where if someone hasn't opened an email in 3 months, 6 months, a year, do we actually want to be sending to them? Do they want to continue getting this? And actually, we'd be better off killing the email from the database and starting again, because then open rates and click-through rates, then it's healthier. You've got a healthier database. It's really complicated because email is sticking around, and it's really good for loyals. It's really good for loyals. And as much as it's not a huge percentage of our overall users, it is much, much, much more of our sessions and actual views, because there's some form of a daily habit that they're coming, or a weekly habit that if they're choosing to get the beauty newsletter and they just want to read the beauty content or from a specific author, they'll get it and they'll come back again for it. But it's subject line testing, dark art, like there's so many different things that we have to flex and we have to change, because what worked a year ago isn't working now. But yeah, that could be an entirely other conversation.
Well, that's a whole thing, isn't it? Okay, I've had a question come in. This could be from your mum, Gordon. I think it's about AI, and I think that's quite a good question, isn't it? AI. What do we? Is AI part of it? Is it like machine? Is there a big role for a machine which gets all this data and makes its own decisions? So I guess by AI, I'm talking about a machine which teaches itself rather than just a machine which acts on rules that we've given them.
Yeah, it's a great question. We really, sometimes it really depends on your definition, but sort of what we do is we really build both machine learning systems and AI systems. When we talk about curating content, that is really an AI system. And the reason it's an AI system is we don't let the machine run wild. The machine is actually something that is intended to work with the newsroom very closely to encode a lot of information about the types of decisions the newsroom makes. So during onboarding, we make a big point of trying to understand, like, what are the editorial traditions that drive curation? How do you think about the flow of content and the flow of information across your site? And as editors, how do you manage that to kind of be who you are? And that is really, it is an artificial intelligence. It's really intended to sit alongside the audience in an artificial way and make intelligent decisions that feel like decisions the newsroom would make. That's one of the things we're most proud of, is sort of like, in 3 years of running a fully automated site, no one has ever written a letter to the editor saying, I think your machine is broken and your machine is making dumb decisions. No one noticed. It was actually transparent to the audience that suddenly we had an AI programming the site. And the reason was you can't really tell the difference. The editors at the Globe and Mail will tell you the same thing. Sophie looks and feels like it's making decisions like the newsroom. The newsroom has always had veto power. They will always have veto power. They can promote any content anywhere they want. They can step in and override Sophie. Generally, what we see is with the tuning that we've done, with the kind of conversation, the consultative kind of approach to setting up the AI, you don't need to do that very much. And generally, the machine is going to pick the content that you as an editor would pick. That means, as an editor, like, this is one of the things our editor-in-chief is most proud of. He has a newsroom that can go find stories to tell. And when it comes to distribution, he can rely on the computer to kind of really help push stories aggressively to help make sure that they kind of find the audiences that are looking for them. So it's a different approach, but it's AI for that reason. It's artificial intelligence, it's machine learning that's been constrained to reflect the people that it's working for.
Okay. I've got another question here, which I think is, what do you do with when there are users who are basically acting anonymously, so they don't want to be tracked, or maybe they've done something in their settings, so they don't want you to watch them, or I guess going on from that, third-party cookies are going to come to an end, and it's going to be hard to know who people are. So, how do we? Is that a problem?
Can of worms. I mean, I think I don't want to get philosophical about it, because I think we're in the industry. It's so frustrating. It's kind of like saying, like, someone wants to be a ghost. They want to go in a shop. They want to like look at things, but they don't actually want to be seen. And it's so frustrating, because it's like you don't realize how much resource goes into creating really great content. And so I think there's just a miscommunication between what good quality content costs. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, and my friends are probably sick of hearing me talk about this, but it's really complicated, because we have to somewhat have respect for people that say, no, I want to be anonymous. I want to be a nobody. But then there's nothing that we get from them. We don't track them at all. We don't serve them anything. We currently serve no ads to anyone who has said no, which means that there's nothing. They get all the value, and we know nothing about them. We didn't even know that they came to the website. So it's an industry-wide problem. If anyone here has anything genius to tell me that I can go back to the superiors and say, oh my God, we should be doing this thing, it would be amazing. I think it's going to be even more complicated as things roll out over the next couple of years.
Okay. Anyone got
Edward,
something?
Anyone got something?
Well, I just think that you get a little bit more if people have logged in. People have logged in.
Yeah.
Which is often, in order to pay a subscription, then and if in addition to that they're given permission to share certain information, you just get a little bit more.
But that's not anonymity. So what do you do with someone
who just? No,
just...
that's quite right. No, absolutely. And I think what devices one use to give people an incentive to share information is an important question. And some people send you quite lengthy forms. When I once signed up to Tortoise, I got sent a really quite lengthy form, and you have to think and reflect on how many people are incentivized to fill out those forms, and the answer is probably not many. So there is that challenge, but giving people incentives to share information in a way that they're comfortable with is important, but it's very hard to scale, to Jenna's point.
I think one of the other things that we've come up against as an industry is we've tried to find very quick solutions. So, for example, OneTrust is our provider, but it's almost become white noise to some extent, because everyone has the same sort of form and it looks the same, and it's super easy to click left or right button, and without even thinking, you don't think about, okay, what am I actually agreeing to? Or like, there's just so much fine print that actually I would be okay. I'd rather see advertisements for a book seller. I don't want to see advertisements for a lawnmower because I don't own a lawn. So do I want that experience? Yes. But do I want someone to do something shady with my data? No. But I think the way that we've communicated to the general public, and it's become some form of white noise where people are just like, yeah, but it's so easy to say no, then why wouldn't I? It's gotten complicated. And because of the speed and scale that we had to act on to be able to be compliant, it means that we've used solutions that are things like OneTrust, and it's made it too easy for people to not even realize what they are agreeing or disagreeing to.
I think when it comes to kind of like consent management and kind of like respecting people's privacy, I mean, the regulators have made it really clear that the practices of the past were abusive and did not reflect the will, intent, or desire of the people. And so I think you look past that at your peril, like literally today, at your sort of regulatory and litigious peril. So you can't and you shouldn't be doing things that are dodgy practices. So things like super cookies, things like persisting user identification, things that are really designed to skirt around that desire that people have to not be tracked. Those are unsavory practices, and it's one of those things as someone in the industry at any level. it's really good to know that these are very serious issues that aren't going to go away and that do shape the set of business practices you have. And so then the question is really, so given that it's very clear that trust was abused, that audiences have felt not well served by the set of practices that were put in place through ad exchanges and other operators where those practices were really driven by non-publisher stakeholders. I don't think anyone loves the idea of the value of your content being driven by third-party data. I know a lot of publishers love to talk about sort of the value of their audience, but there are very few publishers who will remove their floors on an open programmatic exchange to actually find out the real market value. The reason for that is kind of like the ability to reach audiences off your platform through third-party targeting, and to essentially kind of co-opt the value of that and execute it in a lower cost environment is a capability that the networks, that the platforms, that the other participants in the industry made possible. So the answer to that, I think, is really, and what I really expect to see come into focus for a lot of publishers, is a concentration on first-party data, on building experiences, on building environments where it's worth it to be known to the publisher, where the kind of exchange of value is in the favor of the consumer, where they identify, they feel an affinity for, and then now you're going to have like a limited ability to execute on top of that at hopefully a lot higher rates in a more effective way that appeals to advertisers who recognize both the value of the brand and the audience you can bring to them. I think on the other side, the advertising industry is incredibly creative. These are people who will find loopholes, who will exploit loopholes, who will try to preserve the status quo because they have a tremendous investment in doing so. So I think it's too early to know how it works out. My hope is that first-party data, first-party strategies are the strategies that the publishers of tomorrow will learn to rely on and develop in a way that kind of fits the audience's appetite for exchanging information as well.
Thanks, Gordon. Listen, the hour's hoving into view, so I'm going to wrap up, but I'm just going to ask each of you and have a little think, just maybe for one sort of take home that you might give our readers. So I mean, bearing in mind that we have on the webinar, we'll have a lot of small publishers, people from maybe small, regional papers, or B2B, or people up to much bigger publishers. What if there's one sort of solid gold bit of advice you could give them on the journey towards personalization, or anything else? To be honest, what we're about is, I guess, creating websites that are kind of that are sustainable, that people want to read, that create value, and which kind of keep journalists sort of producing good content and in jobs. So I guess I just wondered if each you might want to give us one sort of little nugget each and who wants to go first? Who's Janice?
I'll be I think we as content publishers have so much data anyway, just from even without knowing who the people are, but knowing what they're consuming, that there's so much you can learn from that. So even just finding groupings of content that you might not have originally thought would be something that people would be interested in and can create something around. For example, we didn't realize that royals would be popular enough that it was worth creating an entire newsletter series of royals news. And we hadn't grouped that. That was not an editorial pillar. We would write about royals occasionally when there was something fashion or beauty related, but then actually looking for that and looking for patterns in content and saying, oh, okay, there might be an opportunity here to group it and supply content that someone actually does want to receive in some sort of way. I think there's just so much data that we already have, despite privacy laws and who people are. What they're consuming tells you a lot.
Listen to the reader and look at be willing to change and give them what they want.
Yeah.
Okay, good advice, brilliant. Okay, Edward, do you?
I would say do a piece of work that segments your audience based on the level of engagement, and just make it very simple. High, medium, low, and then learn as much as you possibly can about what drives that behavior. What is characteristics of the highly engaged user, and what are the complaints of the lowest engaged users, the ones that are most likely to leave your site and go elsewhere, and then just learn as much as you can about, from those users, and use that to determine your kind of product and marketing strategy.
Brilliant. Thank you, Edward. And Gordon, I'll let you have the last word.
Yeah, I think my advice might at the end of the day end up being very similar to Edward's advice. But the way we think about it, the way we talk to publishers about it, is you need to be able to test the assumptions in your business model. So if you're testing personalization-based approaches or testing anything where you're trying to leverage the data, make sure that those experiments are connected to the underlying assumptions that power your business. So for audience growth strategies, for audience loyalty strategies, for audience engagement strategies, if you really understand sort of the connection between the assumptions you've made there and the impact on your business, that's going to be the fastest way to really kind of have an impact and to create a program that can be an accelerant, that is self-funding, that allows you to make progress at sort of the maximum rate possible, because it's very easy to justify continued investment. And that's something that we honestly see. I've had the chance to talk to publishers around the world now, hundreds of publishers, and there aren't enough publishers who are able to test some of the most fundamental assumptions of their business model. If you can do that, and you can connect your work on personalization, if you can connect your work on optimization to testing those assumptions, that's the fastest way to really have a material impact on your business. And if you're doing tests to do a test to see what you can do, that tends to be the way to spin your wheels without actually making a dent in the business problems that you have and that you should be able to anticipate.
Yes, assume nothing. Assumption, the mother of all mistakes, isn't it? That's what people say. Brilliant. Okay. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks a million for your time. I really got three or four really good little take-homes there myself. I'm sure everyone else has as well. I'm just going to do a little plug for our next webinar, which is on audience growth, 28th of June. And a little plug for our Future of Media Awards, which are open now and close in 3 weeks' time. So people get your entries in for those. Great. Thanks very much indeed. Goodbye. Thanks.